Hi everyone, I'm Evelina Swigart.
And I'm Owen Diesenhaus, and we are the two moderators for this episode of Potomac Civil Discourse.
The topic of this discussion is going to be climate change. We hope you enjoy the episode. Okay, the first statement is climate change is the most pressing issue in the world today.
Okay, I agree with this statement, even though we're kind of in like two pandemics. I feel like COVID kind of taught us that inaction is not the key, and we should soon climate change's impacts will become irreversible. And with the whole race pandemic, climate change kind of impacts people of color disproportionately. So I feel like it could be a pandemic as well.
I'm of the opinion that climate change is the most pressing issue simply because it's the only issue that we're truly on a clock to solve. If the economy crashes, you can fix it over time, and we have done that historically as a nation and as around the world. And climate change is really the only issue that needs to be solved within a certain time frame. And we're talking about the well-being of the planet, the safety of millions, if not billions of people. So for me, it's kind of hard to see how it's not the most pressing issue.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially since we're already starting to see some effects of climate change, kind of like the fires and some, tropical storms that have been, the intensity has been increased by climate change. And since, like Aidan said, we're already on a clock and we're already starting to see some effects, it's definitely, I think it is the most pressing because we really do need to start solving it now or it's going to become irreversible.
Yeah, I agree with everyone. I just think climate change is to do with every single issue. So the economy will continue to get worse if we don't address it. And people of color are disproportionately affected. There's a lot of stuff that other people have touched on, which I think makes climate change the most important issue because it's a matter of survival for the entire human race.
Anyone with their screen off, if you want to turn it on and join the conversation, you can as well.
I definitely think that climate change is a big issue and that an issue that needs to be addressed, but I don't think that is the most pressing issue in the world today, just considering the fact that COVID-19 has affected millions of people worldwide and is still affecting millions of people worldwide. And I feel like more people at this moment in time right now are affected by COVID-19 than climate change. And I feel like that problem needs to be addressed first before COVID-19 is addressed, or before climate change is addressed.
Yeah, sure. What I see right now is that there's either climate denial or all these apocalyptic claims about climate change. What we see right now is the media drastically misrepresenting all the things about climate change. Fires in California and Amazon have been disproven, and they've been primarily, the media presents these issues as issues of climate change, even though there's been plenty of evidence that shows that, sure, climate change is a part of these, but these are primarily not, these fires don't have to do with climate change or stuff that happens. And all these journalists are the media actually gets more coverage by pushing this narrative that climate change is the worst thing's going to happen to us and that we're all going to die if we don't start doing things now. It's that sort of polarizing narrative. By polarizing more people, they get more coverage, so they exaggerate the issues of climate change.
Just to give my point of view, I also think that I think climate change is a pressing issue, and stuff should be done about it. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily the most pressing issue as of right now. I think there are many other things that need to be addressed before climate change, such as racism, economic inequality, affordability of healthcare, drug addiction, affordability of college education, immigration, stuff like that. But I would not say climate change is the most pressing issue our country is facing today.
Anyone have any last thoughts? If not, we can move to the next question.
Do you want to have a discussion or any responses to the naysayers?
Well, I guess what I would say is that I want in finding a middle ground, I would say that I definitely agree with Charlie in that the media definitely has a lot to gain from narratives that explain climate change as like, you know, the end of the world in, you know, the next 10, 15 years. But I also completely disagree with John's point of view in that things like race relations are more important than the well-being of our planet. And I think also economically, there's tons of evidence for why starting towards more renewable energy sources and addressing the issue of climate change would make us a more economically secure country for the future. And so while I'm happy to entertain ethical arguments for why we need to address climate change and that, you know, maybe we have a responsibility to this planet, but to, you know, bring it back to the numbers, there's obvious evidence that I think it's an issue that needs to be addressed.
Just to kind of add on, I kind of disagree with John's point of like race relations being before climate change. So like, I feel like, in my opinion, they kind of go hand in hand because people of color are kind of more likely to be in poor communities because of like redlining and house segregation. And as a result, they have like kind of less access to clean water and are more likely to be in areas with worse polluted air. So I feel like in a way, people of color, like supporting people of color is supporting climate action.
The second statement is broad legislation like the Green New Deal is an effective way to combat climate change.
I guess I'll start. I personally don't think the Green New Deal is a good plan. I think I more agree with the statement broad legislation because obviously I don't think the Green New Deal is realistic. But I do think that at the end of the day, it does need to be broad legislation. It needs to be collaborative. It needs to be internationally drafted legislation because obviously the United States is not the only country or the major contributor to climate change. So I do think that, yes, it does need to be broad legislation, but no, it does not need to be the Green New Deal.
I feel like any steps towards, I guess, global action towards climate change is positive, but I feel like the Green New Deal might not be the best option, but I feel like it's the only option that we're presented with right now.
All right, people with their screens off can rejoin the conversation.
All right, I guess as a bridge between the two groups, sorry, John, if I beat you to the punch, but
Oh, no, you're good.
I kind of align with what Clay said. I turned off my camera because of the mention of the Green New Deal. It tries to solve things like race relations in combination with solving climate change. It's just further politicizing an issue which shouldn't be politicized. Climate change should be about the science and about the economics, not about anything else. And if you throw race into the mix, you're just going to make the other side more mad and prevent further progress. But I do, obviously, I think when you approach any problem, you need to have legislation and you need to have a plan for how to fix it. So I agree that there needs to be some sort of plan and legislation, just not the current deal.
Yeah, I actually, I agree with Aidan a lot on that. I personally think the Green New Deal, the Green New Deal is a terrible idea. But mainly for the point that it's going to put backward a discussion of climate change by almost radicalizing the debate that both sides are kind of having on both sides, to almost a point past some sort of like sensible, moderate policy that both parties could agree on. And I just think that's going to ultimately cause a further divide on the topic, and that's not what is going to progress our country and society as a whole into the right direction.
On the last topic, Aidan sort of talked about the future of economic stability in the United States. So what we see finite resources like coal and gas, sure, we need to start in finding a way to sort of shift away from that and find sources of renewable energy. But completely blowing up our economy with this plan and the status quo makes no sense, considering, in my opinion, at least, this is not an urgent issue.
I think on top of that, the best way that you're going to be able to combat climate change is to more like persuade large corporations to use less greenhouse gases through tax deductions or other things, so that you can influence corporations that are not only just in the United States, but also like corporations that have factories in China and India and other places that produce a lot of greenhouse gases. And I think you're going to get a lot further trying to persuade those companies to produce less emissions with tax deductions than with large government regulations like the Green New Deal.
All right, now you guys want to have a discussion between each other?
Charlie, I'm just curious, why don't you think like climate change or like global warming is an pressing issue?
Sure. So what sort of impacts of global warming are you most worried about? Like, you worried about crop yield, you worrying about increasing natural disasters? I'm just sort of wondering what about global warming worries you?
For me, it's natural disasters. It's, I guess, clean air.
Mhm.
Yeah, those.
Yeah, sure. I guess what I'd say is you've seen, sure, like you can't deny the fact that the Earth is heating up. Temperatures have been rising average globally, but things like natural disasters, we've seen almost a tenfold decrease in deaths of natural disasters since maybe last century. Basically, what we're seeing is that the increase in technology in today's world is allowing us to sort of be better prepared for these natural disasters. So I really don't see a total issue of natural disasters becoming a global issue when we have the technology to better protect us from them.
Yeah, I just want to take a look at the last century statistic. Yeah, obviously, I'm not sure if that's completely fair, because obviously we're gonna have less deaths because we have improved infrastructure. But what I would say is, if you look at the amount of money that we're gonna have to spend to protect those people from greater and more powerful natural disasters, it's gonna be a lot. Miami has already proposed $500 million worth of flood protections, which they've said that even once they put them in place, they're gonna have to increase them within 10 years. New Orleans is below sea level. New York is directly on the water. These are all massive cities that we have to pay billions of dollars to protect.
Sure, like currently the Netherlands, a third of the entire country is underwater, and over like the past 400 years, they've found new ways to sort of combat that. So sure, like I said, rising sea levels are an issue, but the technology that we can make can sort of combat this, because there's bigger things at play.
One counter argument I kind of have for Charlie is that there's more than just that for economic losses. If we talk about something like Zika, which caused like worldwide panic, that was because mosquitoes were able to expand their habitat, and that in turn made it like come to the United States, because previously that type of mosquito wouldn't have been able to come to our country. Because of global warming, that mosquito was able to come into our environment. And I think when we talk about things like that, or about how species are able to change their habitat and therefore cause like massive crop loss, it is kind of clear that we can like cause major economic issues when we think about like the way species interact within our environment.
Yeah, I've never heard that before. Can you explain to me how the Zika climate change argument, like the link between how they came to America because of climate change?
Well, if you look at the statistic for like the temperature in which the mosquito that transmitted the Zika, it pretty much used to not be able to inhabit the United States, but because of the rising temperature on average, the environment of the United States temperature was high enough that the mosquito could inhabit the United States, and therefore also breed and be able to have its eggs in this environment, therefore allowing it to spread, and the moisture level also increased due to global warming as well.
Certain viruses require certain environments to grow and spread, and so as temperature changes, you're going to see that, and the impacts on the environment wholesale are massive. It's migration patterns for thousands and thousands of species, which like will impact our food sources. There's so much involved in the climate change issue, which I think makes it so important if we can find a solution.
Another like impact that I feel like some people kind of overlook is when the planet warms up, like we may not, like even by just like a small amount, like we may not be thinking that that's like a really big impact, but for certain ecosystems, for example, like in the ocean, if the ocean temperature is warming, that is really, really damaging to some ecosystems. And that can be, if one thing, I think one example is coral bleaching, which is a result of climate change. when ecosystems are damaged, that's obviously a pretty bad impact of climate change.
Businesses should do significantly more to combat climate change, even if it means losing short-term profits.
Well, I'll just speak briefly. I think short-term profits should never be the plan with an economy. If we based our economic plans based on short-term profits, we would be doing a terrible job. We should be planning for the long term and to make this economy better for the future. So setting aside short-term profits is definitely a necessity. Things like carbon taxes could work, and removing subsidies on fossil fuels. I think we spend $20 billion as a country on fossil fuel subsidies, which I think is ridiculous. So moving towards renewables for the future has been proven to be economically beneficial. Why not?
Weston, you can join us again if you want.
Yeah, so I just want to say I'm not like completely opposed to businesses losing short-term profits, definitely for the benefit of climate change. I turned my camera off for the sheer fact that from what I said before, I don't think there's any need for them to lose profits to climate change if the government can submit the tax deductions and persuade big companies so that they wouldn't necessarily have to lose any profits, but would still be persuaded to do more for climate change and reduce emissions and that sort of thing.
Yeah, like Weston said, sort of the world revolves around money. If there's not a profit incentive for these businesses to do more to combat climate change, it's just never going to happen.
Yeah, my issue with waiting for that incentive to come, however, I think the government needs to take action as soon as possible, because I think that these businesses are, and especially certain parts of our politics, are very entwined with the fossil fuel industry. There's a reason that we have $20 billion in subsidies to keep those jobs around, because these fossil fuel companies pay lots of money to keep those subsidies around. So I don't see how our government is going to escape that gridlock and put those policies into place now. So I think we do need a more robust way of putting them into place.
The threat of climate change is overblown or overreported to serve an agenda.
Wait, so you turn it off if you disagree with it, right?
Disagree, yes.
All right, now you guys can speak. Okay, now you guys can speak.
Yeah, I sort of touched on this on the first question. I'm a big believer in this, that the media is misportraying to the general public how big of an issue climate change is for the sake of higher ratings and more interaction. They benefit from having people polarized against each other, and yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I was going to say exactly what Charlie just said. I think the media is kind of doing it for partially their own benefit. And I think there should be methods implemented so that people can get more real, justified, and accurate facts about climate change and how exactly it will affect our future. Because right now there's a lot of ambiguity towards what people think is going to happen. And I guess especially with a topic like this, there's not necessarily a linear path as to how this is all going to play out. But I feel like the media is twisting a lot of things that are said and exaggerating things that shouldn't be exaggerated, and vice versa. So yeah, I would say the media is kind of playing a negative role in this whole problem, and I think it should be handled a little bit better.
Yeah, I don't want to be labeled as a climate denier. I certainly agree that climate change is real, but it's just these apocalyptic claims like our children are going to die if we don't do something now that really bothers me.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, you guys can join the conversation.
I feel like I guess climate change isn't really blown out of proportion. I feel like climate change can have some really serious, irreversible impacts that like shouldn't just be ignored. I think like I saw an art installation of Gan Gollin's like climate clock, and it said that we have like 7 years until I guess our climate budget is kind of depleted. So I feel like it's not something that we should be ignoring and saying it's just like a hoax kind of.
Just to clarify, I think some of the stuff with the clock has to do with our use of natural resources, not of like the irreversibility of climate change in particular. I think it has to be the usage of per hectare space or something like that. But just to go on top of Charlie's point, I agreed with him earlier, so I don't want to seem like I'm being hypocritical. I absolutely agree that there's tons of fear mongering and other such thing in the media to get ratings for climate change and blowing it out of proportion. But I also wasn't willing to say that it was an issue entirely blown out of proportion or that was overrepresented in the media, because I think that there are tons of facets of climate change and the way it impacts our society that we don't understand. So while the media overportrays the impact of a hurricane on a city, maybe it won't tell you about what it's going to do to 150 million people in Bangladesh who live in tin houses, or what it's going to do to reef habitats, or what it's going to do to ocean acidification. There's tons of facets to the climate change issue that don't get attention, and tons of it that get way too much. So maybe there's definitely space for improving the way we talk about climate change, but I'm not willing to say that it's blown out of proportion entirely as a whole an issue.
Yeah, just adding on to that, and when you look at like, I do agree a lot of the time it is these liberal sources that are kind of saying this, and I do agree that sometimes that can be a problem. But if there is so much fear being spread about it, and yet still nothing is being done, I think it just shows that even still, like with all this fear mongering, as people have said, it just shows that like nothing is still being done at the end of the day with so much fear surrounding the topic. So I just think that shows that a lot more needs to change before we can actually solve this issue. So if it is causing fear, I feel like that honestly is a good thing, because nothing will get done until people actually realize this is an issue that will affect them, that will affect their children, that will affect the human race.
Just to respond to that, I think one thing though, that you say that more fear could be good, but I could actually argue the opposite. I could, if there's more fear than there should be, there are going to be people that aren't going to give into that fear, and those people will tend to be the people who can do more about it. So I would say I think just more more of an accurate representation of what actually is happening is going to yield more success in within this problem. But I don't think blowing things more out of proportion than they should be is going to really help anything. If anything, it's going to negatively affect and cause inaction almost, which actually that's been shown over the past however many years.
I guess I would just add that I also think we might overportray the impact the media has on creating an environment where effective change can occur. While fear is impactful in public opinion and polarizing people, it also comes down to like our legislatures to make the changes that are going to prevent this issue from happening. And I think those issues don't come down to fear, but come down to the amount of money in politics at the moment. And it's very easy to point to the influence that the fossil fuel industry has on our the way we address climate change. I mean, the head of the EPA was the guy who ran Exxon, and that was Trump's appointee. So I mean, it doesn't look great. So I think if we put people in power that actually know how to change this issue and aren't doing it for their own self-interest, we'll start to see change.
Okay, the fifth statement is, I think President Trump has done an effective job dealing with climate change, regardless how big a threat I perceive it to be. Okay, everyone can come back.
Go team.
I feel like President Trump kind of tried to invalidate the science in a way and kind of propels the idea that it's just propaganda.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, I mean, there's a quote of him saying, "It's freezing and snowing in New York. We need climate change." He tweeted that in 2012. And just saying we need climate change just shows like how much of an idiot he is when it comes to this topic. Like he really doesn't understand the science. He argues with professional scientists who have been researching this for years, acting as if he knows more, which I just think as a president, you have to understand that there are people within your government system that are designed to help you that know more about a topic than you. And then for especially in something that has to do with science, you should definitely trust the professionals, not like the news media. Just trust the people who are actually working for you, who are educated on the topic.
I feel like we've all agreed here that climate change is some sort of issue, no matter how big or small. And I believe Trump called it a hoax. So I feel like just from that standpoint, we all disagree with him in that sense because we all believe that it's real.
I feel like today's discussion helped destigmatize my position on this issue, or I feel as though I understand the other side's position.
I feel like in some ways, like I understand the other side a little bit more, and then other ways I don't. Like I understand how people feel about certain legislation, but I still don't see how people don't think climate change is as big as a deal as I do, because maybe it's just like the statistics they base their beliefs on. I just don't see it, but yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Kennedy in that sense. Like, I definitely think that climate change is still the most pressing issue. However, like the discussion we had about like the media and kind of how like some sites make it really seem like it's like almost like an apocalypse. I feel like I had kind of almost not been seeing that. Like I'd kind of been just going along with like, oh yeah, like climate change is gonna like kill the next generation. Like I kind of get that they are being a little bit like fear mongering, and I do think that that was something I hadn't really opened my eyes to. So
I'll just say, although like I do think climate change long term is up there in terms of priority for issues the world's facing. I just, as I said in my answer to the first question, I just think that there are a lot of things as of right now that our country needs to figure out and solve before we focus on, or before we shift more of that focus onto the climate problem, because I believe that once we solve our own internal problems, it's going to make it a lot easier and a lot more effective to work on solving the problem of climate change and like finding solutions as to how to not progress it as much as it is right now.
Yeah, I kind of go with I'm agreeing with John in a sense, but I'm also kind of saying the reverse of what he is. I personally think that climate change, unlike the other issues in our society, needs to be solved as soon as possible. And as such, I think what we saw with the Green New Deal, while I didn't agree with its plan, is that when you switch to renewable energy and you put your economy on a path, on a positive path for the future, you're going to create jobs, which is going to help minority groups, and you're going to do lots of things inadvertently to help marginalized peoples. And so I think that part of solving climate change will inevitably be helping society out as a whole. And so I think we need to start with climate change and let that kind of trickle down and help the rest of the country.
Another thing with climate change is that I feel like there are oftentimes like two sides portrayed in the media. Either like you're like an extreme socialist, like almost like a communist, or you're like this flat earther who doesn't believe in science whatsoever. And I feel like through this conversation, I've definitely seen like there's a broad range of views. Like obviously, like I'm not a Marxist, but like I still believe in climate change. And everyone in this conversation is pretty logical in their belief, and I think that was important to realize.
I guess I'll sort of just share some closing stuff. I guess my position on this is pretty unchanged in this discussion. I still believe that people's opinions are shared and are sort of defined and shaped by what media they've been consuming. I think if I've only read stuff about why climate change is an existential threat in the next decade, I would probably believe it. But yeah, I think it's important to sort of consume both sides and see what people are saying as to why climate change is the most important issue and that why it's not really a big deal. I think reading both sides and sort of informing yourself on multiple perspectives is the only way we're actually going to start to achieve something.
I guess I'll build off Charlie with a quick statement. Science, I think, should be what we base this argument off of. It is the middle ground between politics. It's undisputable facts. And so I think we need to start to base our arguments off of science rather than opinions. And we'll start to make, hopefully, some positive change for the future.
Hey everyone, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Potomac Civil Discourse. Make sure you watch out for the next episode, a discussion of the 2020 election, which will be out in a few weeks.
If you would like to get involved in one of our future episodes, email Owen, myself, or anyone else on the team. Thanks so much for watching.